16 years ago, when I was asked by a fellow league member if I would serve on the fundraising committee, I had no idea what we would do. I thought, and I thought, and I thought, how could we have an event to reflect who we are and what we do and what we stand for? Then I came up with an idea to celebrate Women's History Month by honoring the women in our country who have made significant contributions, especially by promoting women's rights and breaking glass ceilings. When I made the presentation to our board of directors, after a short discussion and the inclusion of some of their ideas, the Lunch with Legends was born. I thought we would be lucky if it had a shelf life of 5 years. I never dreamed it would reach 15 years. It has been my great pleasure to be the writer and producer, along with my husband Tom, to help Legends continue to be relevant and popular. I cannot thank enough all of the presenters over the years that found, rented, created, or purchased costumes to take on the identity of their legend and presented their stories with poise and grace, even though some of them were shaking in their shoes. I also want to give a big shout out to Tom, who spent the first 7 years as our narrator and sharing his beautiful voice singing God Bless the USA at the end of each event. He still works on Legends behind the scenes and anytime we need him, and he's here today running sound. Over the years, I have written 22 scripts and 2 one-act plays, starting with Abigail Adams, Carrie Chapman Catt, and Eleanor Roosevelt in 2009. I put down my pen after the 2015 Legends and other people continued to provide the scripts. In 2019, I received a call from Peggy Crawford asking me to consider picking up my pen again and writing about the Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls for our centennial celebration kickoff. My first reaction was, I can't do that. Then I became intrigued and told her I would give it a shot. I wrote the sequel, the rest of the story, for our 2020 Legends to complete our centennial presentation of suffrage, 2 days before the world shut down for COVID. In 2021, Tom and I dug through his video files and presented reprises of Abigail and Eleanor for our Lunch with Legends on Zoom. Last year, with the addition of new member Mary Lou joining steadfast Wilma Laney, I was finally able to have a program honoring the contributions solely of African American women. When Shirley and Marcy presented their idea to me this year of honoring leaders, past, present, and future, I reminded them that my criteria for picking legends is they must be American and they must be dead. This would not be possible with current and future leaders. Well, neither one of them cared 2 hoots about my criteria. So I agreed to give it a try. Interviewing and writing about women that could actually check my work was a bit intimidating. However, it turned out to be an interesting and delightful experience. Being the Legends lady, as many of you have called me over the years, has been incredibly rewarding and a huge part of my life in Moore County. So, as I conclude my tenure as writer and producer, and I really mean it this time, I am very proud to introduce to you 2 strong women that have led, and one who will lead, this country with honor, dignity, and pride, as so many legends have before them. In May of 1838, President Martin Van Buren ordered General Winfield Scott to move the remaining members of the Cherokee Indian tribe who had not voluntarily relocated earlier that year. The plan was to move them from Georgia and North Carolina to Indian land, now known as Oklahoma. While en route to their new reservation, people suffered from exposure, disease, starvation, and thousands died before ever reaching their destination. A volunteer soldier from Georgia who participated in the relocation spoke of his experience several years later. I fought through the Civil War and have seen men shot to pieces and slaughtered by thousands, but the Cherokee removal was the cruelest work I have ever known. The Cherokee Trail of Tears, as the relocation became known, resulted from the enforcement of the Treaty of New Eshota, an agreement signed under the provisions of the Indian Removal Act of 1830.
In the 1820s and 1830s, Cherokees began to adopt the Anglo-American concept of power, a political system dominated by wealthy, highly cultured men, and supported on the ideology that the system that made women subordinate, slowly replacing the original Cherokee culture that operated on a matriarchal system. The children belonged to the clan of their mother, and only their relatives could be traced through her. It meant that marriage gave no rights to the husband over the property of his wife. In a typical Cherokee family, the wife held possession of the property, home, and children. If they part, she keeps the children and the property. The Treaty of Eshota was largely signed by men by 1830, although women were present at the council negotiating the treaty. They no longer had a seat at the table or a vote.
Wilma Mankiller's great-grandfather was a survivor of the Trail of Tears. Her surname, Mankiller, in the Cherokee language, refers to a traditional Cherokee military rank, like captain or major. Born on November 18, 1945, she was sixth in line of 11 children and was raised on tribal lands in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. She lived in a home without electricity, indoor plumbing, or telephones. Her father, Charlie Mankiller, was a full-blooded Cherokee, but her mother, Clara Irene Sitten, was of Dutch-Irish descent. In 1956, 130 years after the Trail of Tears, as part of another relocation to a federally subsidized reservation, the family moved to San Francisco. The idea was that the move would provide jobs in the big city, but jobs were sporadic, and the family continued to struggle with finances, homesickness, and discrimination.
I was 11 years old when we moved to California. I wept tears that came from deep within the Cherokee part of me. They were tears of my history, from my tribe's past, and they were Cherokee tears. In 1963, I married Hugo Alaya, an Ecuadorian businessman. We had 2 daughters, Felicia and Gina. I was not always interested in what would become of my life's work. After my marriage to Hugo, I just kind of followed the path of working for California tribes and Native youth in Oakland, as well as community development in various Cherokee Nation positions. When the famous prison, Alcatraz, closed its doors in 1963, Bay Area Native Americans started lobbying to have the island redeveloped as an Indian cultural center and school. I began paying closer attention when 5 Sioux Indians landed on Alcatraz in March of 1964 and tried to claim it under the 1868 treaty that allowed Indians to appropriate surplus federal lands. Their efforts failed, but reclaiming the rock became a rallying cry for Indians who looked at the island as another symbol of government indifference towards the indigenous peoples. In October of 1969, a fire destroyed the San Francisco Indian Center. A group of activists known as Indians of all tribes set their sights on that unused land of Alcatraz. They laid claim to it by right of discovery to expose the suffering of American Indians. Indians of all tribes made one more attempt to seize Alcatraz. In the early morning hours of November 20th, 1969, under the cover of dark, A force of 89 men, women, and children sailed through the San Francisco Bay and landed on Alcatraz and claimed the island for all the tribes of North America. They ignored the warnings that this was illegal, the occupation, and they moved into the old warden's house and guards' quarters. They began personalizing the island with graffiti reading, "Peace and freedom, welcome, home of the free Indian land." Other buildings had a little bit more flavor, red power, and Custer had it coming. When Alcatraz occurred, I became aware of what was needed to be done to let the rest of the world know that Indians had rights too.
Mankiller was forever changed by Alcatraz and the women's movement that was really beginning to take hold at that time. The Indian activists occupied the abandoned prison for 19 months, and she started visiting them. She also began taking college courses at night while working as director of Oakland's Native American Youth Center. She wanted to reduce the downward spiral of Native youth growing up in the streets and believed that restoring their pride in the Native heritage would help. She learned practical applications for exercising tribal sovereignty and treaty rights when she supported California's Pitt River tribe in its legal battle against Pacific Gas and Electric over the rights to millions of acres of tribal land. She would eventually bring those lessons back to her own Cherokee community. When her marriage ended in divorce in 1977, she and her 2 daughters moved back to Oklahoma and settled on her grandfather's land in Mankiller Flats.
In the early 1980s, I founded the Community Development Department for the Cherokee Nation. It is important to understand that there are 3 federally recognized Cherokee tribes, 3 separate governments, and I am the tribe called the Cherokee Nation that's headquartered in Oklahoma. The United Kiowa Band of Cherokee Nations Indians is also located in Oklahoma. The Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians is made up of descendants of Cherokee, primarily from the Oconaluftee River in Cherokee County in western North Carolina. I was able to secure a federal grant for my first project for the Department Community Development Center in Bell, Oklahoma. Bell, Oklahoma consisted of 200 Cherokee families that had no running water, high unemployment, and a keen sense of disempowerment. Since I sincerely believed in communities' ability to work collectively for the common good, I enabled the construction of a 16-mile water line over a 14-month period. The tribe provided the equipment and the technological assistance. The citizens of Bell contributed the labor on a volunteer basis. While recruiting volunteers for the Bell Project, I met my future husband, Charlie Soap. Charlie was a full-blooded Cherokee and was very fluent in the Cherokee language, so we became colleagues on the project as well as married. After the project was completed, it became the subject of a full-length feature film, The Cherokee Word for Water. My many projects, especially making dramatic improvements in community water systems and housing, was during the administration of Cherokee Nation Principal Chief Ross Swimmer. In 1983, Swimmer, a Republican, selected me, a Democrat, to be his running mate for the 3rd consecutive term as Principal Chief. We both wanted the tribe to be more self-sufficient, but we had 2 very different ideas of how this should happen. Swimmer thought we should develop tribal businesses like hotels and agricultural enterprises. I, on the other hand, wanted to focus on the smaller rural communities, improving housing and healthcare. Our differences did not have that much effect on the election. However, I soon found out that my being a woman was a huge problem.
Mankiller was completely unprepared for the sexism she faced because the traditional Cherokee society was matriarchal. Women did not generally hold titled positions in Cherokee government, but they did have a women's council, which yielded considerable influence and was responsible for training the tribal chief. She received death threats, Her tires were slashed, and a billboard with her likeness was burned to the ground, to mention a few of the protests against her gender. Mankiller also won by absentee votes. However, Swimmer held steady with her as his running mate and won re-election against Perry Wheeler by a very narrow margin on the strength of the absentee ballots. Mankiller also won by absentee votes in a runoff for the deputy election post against Agnes Cohen and became the first elected deputy chief of the Cherokee woman, elected deputy chief of the Cherokee Nation. Wheeler and Cohen demanded a recount and filed a suit with the Cherokee Judicial Appeals Tribunal and the U.S. District Court, alleging voter irregularities. Both tribal and federal courts ruled against the suit, and Mankiller went on to become a national and international icon of female political power and Native American representation.
When Chief Ross Swimmer was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Indian Affairs in D.C., When Chief Ross Swimmer was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Indian Affairs in D.C., he resigned his tribal position and was sworn in, I was sworn in becoming the first female principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. In 1987, I ran for the position and won. During my 10 years in office, I revitalized the nation's tribal government by establishing the Office of Tribal Justice within the U.S. Department of Justice. I advocated relentlessly for improved education, health care, and housing services. Also, infant mortality declined and educational achievements rose. In the Cherokee Nation during my tenure, our population also more than doubled from 68,000 to 170,000. I tried to be a consensus builder, working with the federal government to develop a self-government agreement with the Environmental Protection Agency. I was both the legal guardian of centuries of Cherokee traditions and customs, including the legal codes. The chief executive, or the chief, of the tribe is responsible for a budget that reached $150 million by the end of my tenure. These funds included profits from factories, gaming, hospitality, and other businesses, as well as the federal government.
Although Mankiller suffered with a variety of ailments throughout her career, lymphoma, a neuromuscular disorder, kidney failure, and pancreatic cancer, in 1990, she signed a historic self-determination agreement in which the Bureau of Indian Affairs surrendered direct control over millions of dollars in federal funding to the tribe. Her leadership on social and financial issues made her tribe a national role model, and she remained a strong voice throughout the world for social justice, Native people, and women after she left office in 1995. In 1987, Mankiller was named Ms. Magazine's Woman of the Year. In 1993, she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame and published her autobiography, Mankiller, A Chief and Her People. And in 1998, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Bill Clinton.
When asked to donate a pair of shoes to the American Indian Art Exhibit, I sent a pair of ordinary walking shoes because these were the normal shoes I wore everywhere. My reason for sending those shoes was to send a message. Remember that I am just a woman who is living a very abundant life. Every step I take forward is on the path paved by strong Indian women before me.
Wilma Mankiller died on April 6, 2010, at 64, from pancreatic cancer. Her close friend, Gloria Steinem, was by her side and said of her friend, "Ancient traditions call for setting signal fires to light the way home for her great one. Fires were lit in 23 countries after Wilma's death. The millions she touched will continue her work, but I will miss her every day of my life. Barack Obama stated that she was recognized for her vision and commitment to a bright future for all Americans. Her legacy will continue to encourage and motivate all who carry on her work. Wilma Mankiller remains an inspiration to many Cherokees and strong female leaders everywhere. Have to have equipment.
Need glasses.
In April 1946, Merle Edward Balderston, better known as Curly, was killed in action in World War II. 1 month later, his daughter was born. Named after the father she would never meet, and her mother's sister, Merle Jo Balderston would arrive in this war-torn world on May 18, 1946. She and her young widowed mother went to live with grandparents in Rayford, North Carolina.
Now that she was alone with a brand new baby, my mother, Virginia Briggs Wood, did what so many other young war widows did at that time. She gave up her job as a nurse in Atlantic City and moved back home for solace and support. My grandparents lived on a large farm outside of Rayford. However, I don't remember a lot about it at that time. About a year and a half after that, my mother met Paula Bernett through her sister, Betty Jo, whose husband was stationed at Fort Bragg and was a friend of Paul's. After they were married, Paul adopted me and became the only father that I knew. Dad was a decorated World War II veteran, having served in the 82nd Airborne as a paratrooper and landing at Normandy. He also served in the Korean War for a year. He retired from the military my freshman year of college as Command Sergeant Major. Dad then went on to work for the House of Rayford Turkey Farms in the distribution department. My mother went to work as an elementary school secretary after my two sisters, Paula and Judy, were born.
Jo thrived in her childhood and upbringing in the small community. She attended Rayford Elementary School through the 8th grade and then attended Hope County High School. While she was in the 8th grade, her teachers asked her to lead the line as a student conductor in the 8th grade choir, and her life of leadership began. Jo also took piano lessons for 9 years. The first few years she loved, the last few years not so much, because she had a very serious, severe teacher. During her last recital, she embarrassed her mother so much that her mom let her quit the lesson. You might say that was her first foray into problem solving. In high school, Jo was very active, played basketball, served as vice president of her class, and president of the Homemakers Club, which is probably the start of her being such a great cook. She received many accolades during her high school years and graduated 5th in her class. In order to achieve her lifelong goal, becoming a teacher, Jo attended East Carolina University in Greenville. We all know that the greatest teachers among us have flaws. And although Jo loved college life, she somehow forgot why she was there. Her natural love of people and sense of fun became a bigger priority than her seriousness as a student, and she was not invited back for the second semester. She was given the caveat instead: attend Sand Hills Community College and prove that you can be a serious student. She did. She was, and she returned to ECU and graduated with a BS in elementary education in 1968.
Having learned my lesson, I concentrated on my studies and didn't have much time for college activities or antics. I did have time to go on an occasional date, and through a blind date set up by my roommate, I met the love of my life, Paul Nicholas, better known as just Nick. We married in 1968 and moved to College Park, Maryland, where Nick was attending the PhD program at the University of Maryland. I began teaching in Prince George's County, Maryland, in a totally non-graded classroom. It was quite a challenge for me as it was a brand new approach to teaching. Just as I was getting the hang of it and becoming successful, Nick received his draft notice and off he went to the Army. I moved back to Rayford with my parents while he was in basic training. Then while he was stationed in Fort Jackson for 1 year, I moved with him and taught in Fort Jackson for that year. At the end of the year, he received orders to go to Vietnam. So 6 months pregnant with Jennifer, once again, the mother with a child, albeit not yet born, moved back to Rayford to stay with her mom and dad while her husband served in the military. The baby was born, the husband returned home and was discharged. So we headed back up to Maryland where he resumed his studies and took a job for the U.S. Customs Services. And I resumed my career in education and remained in Prince George's County for 33 years.
Upon return to Maryland, Jo settled into her lifelong dream of teaching and education. She taught for 13 years at Spring Hill Lake Elementary before becoming an instructional support teacher at Shadyside Elementary for 1 year, then elementary instructional assistant at Laurelland Elementary for another year. In 1989, Jo moved to the Area 2 Administrative Office, where she served as the teacher supervisor for the assistant superintendent. Some of her duties included monitoring mentoring non-tenured teachers, serving as a liaison between schools, parents, and communities, and presenting instructional in-services on classroom management, and many, many other services, while directed at improving and helping classroom teachers. While at the administration office, her supervisor and assistant superintendent, Mr. Conrad Koch, suggested that she return to school and study for her master's in administration to potentially become a principal. She took his advice, and in May 1989, Jo graduated with her master's in education in administration and supervision. She continued to work at the administration office until she began as principal of Arrowhead Elementary School, a job that soon became a vocation for this very professional, very dedicated educator.
I was an educator for 32 years, and during all of those years in my varied position, there was only one constant: making sure all children learn. My new assignment was to replace a retiring principal who had been there for many, many years. His philosophy was the principal is the manager and administrator. Therefore, he did not have much interaction with the students or their families. His secretary informed me on my first day that parents were not allowed in the principal's office. I informed her that they most certainly were welcome in my principal's office, and my job was not to sit behind a desk all day and push papers. She resigned shortly after that. Then I began recruiting teachers who shared my philosophy that all children can learn and teachers must find a way for them to learn. I respected my staff, but I expected much from them. We worked side by side and created an environment of welcome and respect among the entire building. Children were happy, staff was happy, and families were happy to participate and help us all they could. My work was rewarding, but challenging. I had an incident when one of our special education students came in and had been abused by his father. This was not the first time, and I had called social services on more than one occasion. His mother was an invalid, his father was a veteran, but with mental issues, and the child was eating frozen food direct from the freezer. Social services told us to hold the child somewhere and they would come and get him. In the meantime, his father came to school. As I did every day, I was sitting in the front of the hall greeting the students in the morning, so when I saw him, I asked, how could I help him? And he said he needed to see his son. I told him that his son did not come into school that day, and did he know where the boy might be? He began rocking back and forth, and he had a machete with him too, making me nervous, so I started talking to him about an insignia on his Army shirt. I told him about my father's experience in the Army, which he respected, so he calmed down and he left. Yes, Yes, this was scary, but the children in my building were my responsibility, and I wasn't going to let anything happen to this sweet young man. One of the most challenging days as a principal was September 11th, 2001. My school was located just outside of Washington, D.C., and I was out on bus duty when my secretary called and told me to come to the office right away. I thought, well, that's probably a parent problem. But when I got there and saw what was happening on TV, I immediately pulled myself together, called all of my specialists and sent them to the classrooms to make sure that they did not show our morning TV program or even turn on the TV. I didn't want to upset the children. Parents began to show up to get their kids, and we strictly followed our school policy of nobody but the parent could pick up the kid without the parent's permission. I only had one irate parent bug me, a police officer who wanted to take several children. I confronted him and told him he would need to call each parent and give me verbal permission. Although he did return later and apologize, it was a very harrowing day, to say it the least. We also had a lot of fun times in our school. We held a reading challenge, and I told the students if they read a certain number of books, I would dress up like an ice cream truck driver and deliver ice cream on my bike. They met the challenge, and I rode the bike in costume. Each reading challenge meant a new challenge for me. I took them for a ride in a limo, and once took the winners to a farm and let them watch me milk a cow. I was often in the dunk tank for our fun day, and of course, always dressed for Halloween. But I could never say anything because they would recognize my voice, so I was a silent person. I was not an office principal. I was in and out of the classrooms, watching and observing both the teachers and the students. We had a motto for our decisions: consensus, no fault, and collaboration. When we tried something new, if it didn't work, on to plan B. I felt that my school was very successful. However, when the state test came out, we were judged by all of our students, and we needed work. One of the problems was having 12 special education classrooms scored the same as our 18 regular education classrooms. It's not fair to judge special ed students the same as the mainstream students. They don't generally understand grade level tests. I felt so strongly that this is unfair, I testified in front of the Maryland General Assembly to try to change this method of grading schools, but unfortunately wasn't successful.
It's obvious that Jo's students, teachers, and colleagues appreciated her dedication to and love of education. However, they were not the only groups to notice. Over her 32 years, she received many, many prestigious accolades and awards, including the Prince George's County Outstanding Educator Award, the Prince George's County Chamber of Commerce Outstanding Administrator Award, and the Washington Post Distinguished Leadership Education Award, to name just a few. Dot McGovern Wallace, a colleague and friend of Jo's for the many years she taught, summed up her career this way: Jo was admired for her dedication to her staff, students, and families. Children always came first for Jo. If they needed remedial help, she would provide it. If they needed food or clothes, she would buy it. If they needed encouragement, she was there. If they needed a come to Jesus talk about their behavior, she delivered that too. Jumping rope on the playground or running after a mischievous little one, that was Ms. Nicholas. Her staff knew she would always hold them accountable for doing what was best for the children, but at the same time, if a cranky parent popped in and disrupted their learning environment, Jo always had that teacher's back. She led with her heart every single day. Although she wasn't really ready to retire, Nick was. So she took off her principal's hat, erased the board for the last time, and followed her husband to Seven Lakes, North Carolina. They chose to come here to be near their grandsons, and it gave her the chance to live close to her hometown, full of friends and relatives. And of course, to begin her next chapter, leading the League of Women Voters of both Moore County and the state of North Carolina. During Jo's career in education, she was a member of the Teachers Union, then the Administrators Union, serving as the president for 2 years. She demonstrated and marched on behalf of the administrators and worked for their rights at the local, state, and national level. These experiences accelerated Jo's interest in public policy. After she retired, she changed her advocacy from helping professional educators to advocating for women's rights, starting with her own daughters. One day, Jo received the call from a neighbor at Seven Lakes. Dodie Strauss was an active member of the League of Women Voters and was very well known for inviting new residents to attend a meeting. She certainly picked the right one to invite that day.
I started working with the Issues Committee, then chaired it for 1 year. After that, I was approached to become service president. I served as president of the Moore County League for 4 terms, or 8 years. I was asked what my greatest accomplishment was for Moore County, and no doubt, I have been proud of the board's decision to take a chance on the Lunch with Legends fundraising idea and to help it grow into the successful project that it has become. The League grew by leaps and bounds during my tenure, and I think Legends, as well as well-done candidate forums, voter registration drives, have had a large part in the growth. Making things happen often requires the ability to pick the right people to head up the projects, just as I tried to pick the right teachers for my school. I've done that, and the Moore County League has benefited greatly from those choices. I was in my 3rd term as the president of Moore County when I was asked to serve on the state board. I found it very interesting and continued to get more and more involved in the state level. Eventually, they asked me to serve as president of the state, so I agreed. My main goal as president, and as I have directed my board to remember, the state works for the locals. It is our responsibility to do everything we can to help the local leagues to be the best that they can. I have really loved interacting with leaguers from all over the state, watching and learning from other successful leagues, and helping new leagues grow and succeed. I'm consistently amazed at the talent and the creativity that the North Carolina League members and their willingness to serve their communities as activists for good and fair government. While serving as state president, I've implemented a state awards program in recognizing our outstanding individuals and leagues at a biannual state convention, have tried to conduct polished, professional, and informative statewide meetings each year for all of our leagues. I've also increased the grants available from the state to the local leagues to help finance their various programs and projects on the local level. I have continued to represent and speak on behalf of the state league at every opportunity, promoting forums and public discussions of civic reforms and supporting needed legislation in North Carolina.
Jo has exhibited her leadership skills for almost 65 years. From the time her 8th grade music teacher asked her to lead in the choir, throughout her entire life as a student, an educator, and a community and church leader. She has had an extraordinary influence on all those who know her and are lucky enough to call her friend. Jo has managed throughout all of this to stay true to herself. As a woman, a wife, she and Nick have been married over 54 years, a mother, as proven by her 2 beautiful daughters who are competent, independent, and successful, a grandmother whose 3 grandchildren are also successful, competent, and independent. As she leaves the State League in May, at the conclusion of her 2nd term, she's ready to pass the gavel on to someone else. However, her love for the League will never waver, and she will remain active in the Moore County League as long as she can. When asked what she would like her legacy to be, as she steps down from the leadership role and spends more time with her granddaughter and on the golf course, her answer was simply, "I'd like to think I made a difference as an educator and for my community." She has done both and sets an example for all of us. Born on November 23, 2003, to military parents, Emma Mack had an extraordinary beginning for the first 13 years of her life. Her father, Clint, a member of the 82nd Airborne out of Fort Bragg, was deployed 6 times, including 2 stints in Europe. Although Emma and her mother, Summer, came back to Summer's hometown in Robbins, North Carolina, between deployments while they were in Europe, her mother made extraordinary efforts to make sure that young Emma was exposed to all of the different cultures, people, and experiences she could. Her dad was gone a lot, so her mom took off on her own, sometimes scared to death, with her little girl, and hit the travel circuit, primarily throughout Italy and Germany.
My mother has always told me that I was a rather determined and stubborn little girl. When we were traveling throughout Europe, she insisted that I hold her hand, but I told her I was far too brave and too grown up to hold her hand. I would just hold my own hand. And I clasped my hands in front of me. I attended school in Germany from the 1st to 5th grade. I ran for student government and won in both the 3rd and 4th grades. In 3rd grade, I was elected the publicist, and in the 5th grade, I was elected vice president. My position as publicist was my first real foray into writing, something I've enjoyed my entire life.
Emma's father retired from the Army as a sergeant major, and they returned to Moore County to settle down in West End to raise their family. By now, there was an addition to the family: Emma's younger sister Stella, and still to come, baby Lizzie. Her dad took on the job as town manager for Robbins, and her mom began as a school-based therapist for the Moore County school system. And Emma's final 6 years as a Moore County student began. Throughout those 6 years, time and time again, Emma would see a need to step up, no matter what the situation called for. It isn't always easy stepping up, especially during adolescence. It can be lonely when you choose not to run with the pack. However, her years as an Army brat helped her develop a real sense of who she is, including a pretty good dose of self-confidence developed by the time she reached middle school. But like all teenagers, Emma had her moments. Like the time she and her friends were skinny dipping in the 8th grade and got caught. Even with the greatest leaders in the world, every decision will not be stellar.
My leadership skills seemed to really take off in high school, although I never really thought in terms of leadership. It was more a matter of determination and that stubbornness thing. When there's something that needs to be done, do it. Don't stand around and wring your hands. When the Northmore High School Theater Department wanted to produce The Lion King, we were unable to raise money for the costumes because of the pandemic. I wasn't going to let that stop us from performing such a wonderful musical. So I learned how to sew, recruited several people to help me, and got those costumes made. The show went on, and the costumes were amazing. While in middle school and high school, I performed in over 9 musicals and was a member of the Northmore Marching Mustangs playing the vibraphone. Music and performance has been a huge and integral part of my years in school. When I was a little girl, I was once the choral group, and I heard someone mention that I had a nice voice. I immediately broke out into song, quite abruptly, and much to everyone's amazement, I've been singing ever since. Last summer, I attended the International Thespian Festival in Indianapolis with my fellow high school thespians, representing North Carolina. One of the requirements of the competition was to write a 10 to 15 minute one-act play in one evening. I wrote a comedy called The Toes and Hose Shoe Convention. It was a great success and an incredible experience in writing under a deadline. The music director at our church approached me about serving as an assistant, a role I've enjoyed very much. When the director's away, I had the privilege of leading worship through my love of music. Along with my mother, one of the strongest women I know, Selena Quintanilla Perez, also just known as Selena, is my favorite female role model because of the way she integrated Mexican and American music into what is called Tex-Mex music. Known as the Queen of Tejano music, she was initially shunned and criticized because Tejano music was considered a male-dominated music genre. However, with her tenacity, style, and talent, she won the Tejano Music Award for Female Vocalist in the year of 1987, followed by 9 consecutive wins. With those awards and recognition, her popularity soared. She's ranked among the most influential Latin artists of all time and is credited with catapulting Tejano music into the mainstream market. Selena's passion for accessibility to music for all cultures inspired me to start my program to teach music to children. I call my program Emma's Melodies and was fortunate to be able to teach music to the children of Hope Academy during my senior year of high school. Something else I love, as well as music and theater, is politics and government. During my AP US Government and Politics class, we were given many opportunities for discussion of both historical and current political issues facing our state and nation. Each student was allowed and encouraged to share their own opinions and interpretations, so you can imagine some of the heated debates. It seemed like I was usually on the opposite side of the debate than my fellow students, but I tried to always present my case with poise, take their comments in stride. I did not turn to personal attacks or deflection, but presented my case with evidence, not wavering when I truly believed I was right. I also tried to listen to the points of views of my peers and evaluate whether or not I should reconsider my position. My social studies teacher recommended me for an opportunity to travel to Washington, D.C. during the summer of 2020 to participate in a law and politics summer seminar for high school students. Unfortunately, the seminar was canceled, again because of the pandemic, but I think it would have been a remarkable and wonderful opportunity for me. I would have loved it.
Emma was extremely involved in campus activities and events throughout high school, including speech and debate, student government all 4 years, Key Club, Interact, and Beta Club. Many of these are service clubs with projects such as Samaritan's Purse shoebox collection, coat drives, food drives, and community cleanups. Generally, Emma was the student that organized those activities and led by example all the way till the end of the event. She aided those less fortunate with patience, kindness, and without judgment. Kimberly Fielder Jones, Northmore High School theater director, said this of Emma. Emma has a graceful and productive way of leading. I was always impressed with her ability to lead while making sure everyone involved in the group or cast felt important. She made sure they knew they were appreciated and their input mattered. Other students would seek her out, and I think that speaks volumes for their trust in her as a leader and role model. The ending product was always impressive, and the experience at the group was always positive. I have no doubt her determination and drive will lead to her success. Ryan Giggy, her social studies teacher, stated that he also had no doubt Emma was prepared to become a leader in her community after graduation, and that she had already proven she has the character and skill sets to positively impact others and to lead and encourage change for the better.
After graduation, I began making plans preparing to leave for college at UNC Chapel Hill. My original plan was to major in international studies, but long after I got to Chapel Hill, I realized I was more interested in journalism. My parents had steered me in the direction of international studies because they wanted me to travel and to see the world. In essence, to pick up where we left off when we moved from Germany back to the States in Moore County. My mom loved growing up here and was happy and ready to return to raise her family, but her years traveling America and the world was something she always cherished. She wanted that for me. My time at UNC so far has been a great experience. I auditioned and won a part, albeit a small part, in a play on campus entitled Spring Awakening. The big parts are generally reserved for the upperclassmen, and I'm the only freshman in the show. I went by myself the audition, and yes, I was a bit nervous, but it worked out since I landed a part. My days as a student government publicist at my elementary school in Germany taught me to write, and I've learned to love it. When I wrote an article for the Robbins Express about preparing for college, I realized how much I enjoyed the outlet of expression that writing provides for me. Since then, I've decided to major in journalism and am very excited to have been accepted into the Hussman School of Journalism at UNC. I hope someday to be a broadcast journalist so that I might focus on honest reporting and lead the country away from the conversation of bias that seems to prevail so often in this political culture.
Proof of Emma's leadership and dedication to her academic life is exhibited by many honors and awards she received while in high school. Some of these honors include being chosen as a Ruth Pauli Scholar, which included attending dinner with Nancy Giles and participating in her lecture, Let's Have a Conversation. North Carolina Governor's School nominee, National Youth Leadership nominee, which was canceled because of COVID, and the North Carolina Theater Conference Excellence in Acting Award for participating in a one-act play entitled An Absolutely True Story as told by a bunch of lying liars. Awarded for her performance at the state level. And a perfect score recipient of the North Carolina Chorus for empowering the next generation to create, perform, and respond to music.
I think leaders are people who rally and guide others in achieving a collective goal. 3 traits I find most important to be a true leader are humility, tenacity, and impartiality. I try to humble myself for my community, have tenacity when I feel discouraged, and be impartial to all causes and ideas. If I can maintain those 3 characteristics in all that I do, I'll be assured to have lifelong success as well as become an effective leader.
Emma's willingness to grow and learn and to her push to be the best that she can be will guide her to success. She is not afraid to try anything new and is dependable, punctual, and smart. She continues to step up when she sees a need and works with her peers and associates with grace and kindness. There's no doubt that this extraordinary young woman will be a successful leader in whatever endeavor she undertakes, no matter where she goes or where she lands. We can be confident that she will make Moore County proud, as well as serve as a competent, capable leader, and will make any community stronger, better, and more successful. It is my pleasure to present Emma Mack as our very first League of Women Voters of Moore County Future Leader. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our very first past, present, and future leaders. Past leader Wilma Mankiller, outstandingly portrayed by Paula Shelton. Currently, Joe Nicholas, and